Hello, everyone. On behalf of the University of Scranton, my name is Rebecca Spirito-Dolgan, and I'm here to welcome you to our featured session. This session is featured by our sponsors, UPMC Health Plan, Geisinger, and LMH Partners. I am very pleased to welcome you to our keynote session with Dr. Temple Grandin. We hope you are enjoying the conference. For this session, you're welcome to put your questions into the box on your screen, and we'll have time for some Q&A toward the midpoint of the session. Should you experience any technical difficulties, please visit the FAQ troubleshooting guide found on the main event page. Now, please join me in a warm welcome for the renowned author, animal scientist, and autism advocate extraordinaire, Dr. Temple Grandin. Dr. Grandin?
It's great to be here by virtual. I basically have not been on an airplane since the middle of March. It's been a new experience to not be doing travel, do it all virtually. Now, when I was a little kid, I had all the full-blown symptoms of autism, no speech until age 4. Very, very lucky to have really good speech therapy. Can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. You got little kids that are not talking, you got to start working on them. Now, you could put my first slide up, please. What I want to do is I want to get you really thinking about education. See, the thing about autism is it goes from being somebody like a scientist, Silicon Valley programmer, or maybe a great artist like Michelangelo. So at one end of the spectrum, you can have some great abilities. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you might have very severe challenges, such as no speech, difficulty dressing, and it's all got the same name. Now, when kids are really little, they all look about the same. And if you get really good early intervention, some of them you can kind of pull them out of it, get them talking. And I just can't emphasize that enough. My next slide shows two famous people that very possibly might be on the spectrum. Einstein had no speech until age 3. He would definitely be in special ed or early intervention today. Some people may argue he wasn't autistic because he got married, but I'm seeing a lot of grandfathers that come up to me that find out that they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. And these grandfathers had good jobs like engineering and accounting. And I think one of the reasons for that is in the 50s, in my generation, social rules were taught in a much more structured manner. That was done with all kids. You were taught to say please and thank you. When you made social mistakes, you were corrected. Grown-ups corrected little kids no matter where you went. Steve was bullied in school. I was bullied in school. I managed to get through elementary school without being bullied. And that's because my teacher explained to the other children that I had a disability that was not visible like a wheelchair would be visible, and that the other kids needed to help me. So elementary school went quite well. High school was a disaster of bullying. I got kicked out of a large school for fighting and throwing a book, and a girl called me a retard, and ended up going to a special school. And for about 3 years, I ran the horse barn. I didn't do hardly any studying. What got me studying was when studying became a pathway to a goal, a pathway to becoming a scientist. I cannot emphasize the importance of my good teachers and my mother. Mother had a really good instinct of just how much to push me. I had a great speech teacher, a fabulous 3rd grade teacher, and then a really great science teacher who got me motivated. The next slide talks about Thomas Edison, and he dropped out of school. He was described as a hyperactive high school dropout. He memorized every street in his town. It's very likely that he had autism. And when I was out working on all of my projects, in fact, half the cattle in this country, when they're handled, they go through a piece of equipment I designed called the center track restrainer system. It's in all the big plants. I worked on developing that. It's now like over 25 years ago. I was out on all these big construction sites. And one of the things I learned is about 20% of the people I worked with, really super skilled tradespeople, machinery designers, and industrial designers, were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. Those people are not getting replaced today, and we need them. Steven Spielberg was rejected from a top film school. He's on my next slide. And I skipped Jane Goodall there. But the point I want to get across here is some of these people that have been very influential, would they have gotten through today's educational system? Jane only had a 2-year secretarial degree when she did her famous work, 2-year community college degree. Now it was in the UK, so it was called something else, but that's basically what she had. And look at the work she did. And then Steven Spielberg, on my next slide, he was bullied in school. And one of the things that helped him was early exposure to career interests. When he was a child, his favorite thing was a Super 8 movie camera. Kids get interested in stuff they get exposed to. He was exposed to movies very young. I got interested in the cattle industry because I was exposed to it as a teenager on my aunt's ranch. One of the big things that concerns me today, since a lot of schools have taken out hands-on classes, is we're not getting exposed to enough stuff to figure out what you might want to do for a career. The next slide is a super important slide because that's my slide on the different kinds of minds. And I'm reviewing the literature and I'm finding more and more research on this. I have written about my visual thinking. I've wrote about that in my autobiography, Thinking in Pictures. I'm a photorealistic visual thinker. Scientists call that object visualizer. That was shown just perfectly in the HBO movie about me. It showed pictures flashing up in my mind. That is exactly how I think. But object visualizers can't do algebra. Never have passed an algebra class. So how did I manage to get through college and get a PhD? Well, in '67, it was not required for the freshman math class. I took probability, matrices, and statistics. And then to get through the statistics classes, I got a C as in Charlie with a ton of tutoring. I had to just kind of wobble through it, but I got through it. And there's research that shows that an object visualizer and then the more mathematical visual spatial person, they're two totally different things. And I'm getting concerned that our educational system is screening out object visualizers. Now, when it comes to autism, you often have uneven skills. Like I'm an object visualizer, but you may have another person who's on the spectrum who's the mathematical. In fact, 60 Minutes just this Sunday, really great show, profiled a guy that did a special program that could analyze data from some of the NASA telescopes. And he's the mathematical person. And then you've got the verbal facts guide. You can get that in autism too. Love facts, statistics about baseball or whatever their favorite thing is. And what we got to be doing is building on the area of the person's strengths. Okay, let's look at us object visualizers. We're going to be good at industrial design. We're going to be good at building things, skilled trades. We've got a gigantic shortage right now of skilled trades, welders who can read drawings and make things, mechanics, heating and air conditioning, electrical, many, many different things. Huge shortage, COVID-proof jobs, recession-proof jobs. They'll never go away. Too many people stick their nose up at it, go, well, they got to go to college. Well, I'll tell you right now, we need them. We got electric wires falling down in California. We got more electric wires that fall down where my editor and my brother live in Connecticut. Yes, we have to have people to fix stuff. That's not going to go away. And then the mathematicians and the programmers, they give us all this technology that we're using right now. Yes, it comes from the autistic brain. And in my book, The Autistic Brain, I describe the science behind these different kinds of minds. And since that book's been published, I'm finding more and more articles about the visual spatial mind and the object visualizer. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of research where the visual spatial gets merged together with the object visualizer. And that is actually wrong. I just want to show off some of my brain scans. Every time a new technology comes out, I like to show it. The next slide shows a brain scan. And I've got a huge visual thinking circuit that goes all the way back to the primary visual cortex. The next slide shows another slice through my head. And I've got a gigantic visual thinking circuit. Now, what tends to happen in autism is a brain can either be more thinking and cognitive or more social emotional. So how does the brain kind of allocate its resources? There's a certain amount of this that's just basic personality variation. When does becoming slightly geeky become autism. It's a true continuous trait. And I found this fabulous paper. I just love it. It's called Solitary Mammals as a Model for Autism. I was at Kansas State University. I was a visiting professor for a week, and I had about 2 hours to do nothing in one of their offices. So I surfed the internet, and that's when I found this paper. And basically, if you look at animals, your lions, your big cats, they're much more social than the tigers and the panthers and the leopards. They're the solitary animals. So if they were people, they'd probably be mildly autistic. But I guess the lions are doing the diagnosing. At what point does it become a disability? You see, this is the thing. It's a true continuous trait. And I don't think back in the cave days that the social yakety yaks around the campfire made the first stone spear. It would have been us techies that get really interested in the stuff we do. The next slide shows my trashed out multitasking. One of the things I absolutely cannot do is multitasking. One of the problems you got in autism is you got a slow processor. So I'm going to be really geeky. If I was a computer, I'm an Intel 286, the very, very first chip. But for memory, I've got the cloud. You want Microsoft Cloud, Amazon Cloud, whatever cloud you prefer. My memory is the cloud, tons and tons of memory, little tiny chip. So multitasking will be a problem. I have a problem with interrupting. I still have trouble with timing speech. I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. I need a pilot's checklist. I need to write it down. Small processor. Now, most of the work I've done in design, it doesn't matter that I have a small processor because I can just access the memory banks. Now, the next slide talks about how do I determine what kind of a thinker a kid is? When kids get to be like maybe third grade, 7, 8 years old, you're going to see it. The art minds will be good at art. They'll also be good at mechanical things, building things with Legos. The math thinker, good at building things, maybe music. And if he's really good at math, then move him ahead to more advanced math. The other big mistake that's not being made is we don't introduce tools to kids. I've seen 16-year-old kids building stuff with Legos. Nobody thought to introduce tools. Just ridiculous. And the verbal thinkers, they'll know all the facts about whatever thing is their absolute most favorite thing. So it's pretty easy to figure it out. You're not going to figure it out at age 3, but by the time they get, second and third grade, you should see it. And we need to be building the strength and thinking about what could this kid do? And I'm seeing way too many kids that get into teenagerhood and nobody's worked with teaching them things like shopping. When I was 7 years old, I was shopping and I knew exactly what I could buy with 50 cents. Boy, back in the early 50s, 50 cents could buy a lot. I could get 5 comics. I could get a little airplane and 1 comic. But if I wanted that 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning that. Now, inventing comes in our family. And the next slide shows my grandfather's patent for the autopilot for airplanes. And he worked together with another guy who was probably autistic in a loft over where they fixed trains. And this was in every plane during World War II. So here's an example of the different minds working together. My grandfather, the more mathematically trained MIT engineer with a visual thinker, who came up with this crazy idea for 3 little coils that could sense the magnetic field. This is where the different minds actually complement each other on doing projects. Now, the next slide shows all the things we need to get back in the schools. And in some states, they've started to put these things back in the schools. Things like art, sewing, cooking, playing musical instruments, woodworking, theater, welding, where you can read drawings, auto shop. If I hadn't had art and sewing and woodworking when I was in elementary school, I would have absolutely, totally hated school. Also, hands-on classes teach problem solving. Now, here's a little snowflake that I made out of a piece of printer paper. And I showed this the other day to a teacher, and I got a very surprising response. I was a little bit shocked. They said, what would happen to this child's self-esteem if the little snowflake fell apart and they cut it wrong? And I said, well, you just get another piece of printer paper and you try again. And if that still doesn't work, maybe you look it up on YouTube. They need to learn how to do that. Doing a lot of hands-on things, you learn how to learn from your mistakes. kids today are getting so worried about mistakes. Another reason for putting these classes in is shown on my next slide. And doing arts and doing hobbies foster scientific success. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. This is an actual study. That's another reason for putting these things back in. Now, the next slide, I'm going to be talking about how I got my business started. Now, since I was weird, my idea of an interview was to walk into an interview and then I would just show people pictures of my drawings. In other words, I would show the work, make a portfolio of the things you can do. And if you're a mathematician, then you could show a portfolio of your, some of your programming that you've done. So someone can look at it and go, oh, that's really, really, really super nice code. Next slide shows one of my drawings. And that's the drawing of the dipping vat system that I did in 1978. That's the drawing. And it made me so happy that in the HBO movie, they showed my actual drawings. That really turned me on, showing of the things I did. Visual thinking is shown accurately in the movie, but I liked the fact that all my projects were in there. The next slide shows another drawing. And this is the drawing that I sent to the head of Cargill. This would have been back in the late 80s. And I designed the front end for every Cargill plant in North America. I think that's pretty good for somebody that thought that was mentally retarded. In fact, doing the original dipping vat projects in the 70s, the thing that motivated me was I wanted to prove I wasn't stupid. The biggest barrier I had in the early 70s in Arizona feed yards was being a woman. Much bigger barrier than autism ever was. No, they actually did put bull testicles on my vehicle at Scottsdale feed yard. That happened. Now I'm going to just show you some pictures of some of my jobs because this is how I would sell myself, show my portfolio. We can go to another picture that shows a curved handling system, and then another picture that shows the replica that they built for the movie. Love the fact, this is the geek side of me. They recreated all my projects, like just so cool. And then the next slide shows my brochure. I had a very, very professional brochure. I didn't say anything about autism in here. And this is where you get into, do you disclose? Well, until the movie came out, I basically didn't disclose to clients. Unfortunately, there still is some very bad discrimination going on. The 60 Minutes show just this Sunday was really, really wonderful to help reduce the discrimination. But I talked to a guy just a couple of weeks ago, real recently. He worked in an outdoor job with technical stuff. I can't tell you what it is. I can't identify him. He had been at this job for 5 years. And he disclosed that he was autistic and they laid him off. It's just that happened like right now. But when you're different, you just got to show people what you can do. And I got a few more pictures from my brochure. The next slide shows a project I did in the early 80s. And the other next picture shows the dipping vat project, and it's black and white because this was middle 70s. And color photography was very expensive to put in the brochures in those days. And we'll go on to the next slide, show another picture of the system. You can see the airlines up there for operating the gates. I actually installed those. Now, the next slide, I'm going to be talking about the whole issue that I'm worried that our educational system is screening out us visual thinkers. But you need us object visualizers to prevent big messes. You see, there's two ways to deal with risk. You can calculate it or you can see it. And when I found out why Fukushima melted down, I couldn't believe it. It's not a very good idea when you live next to the sea to not have waterproof doors. Protect your electrically operated emergency cooling pump. I don't know how to design a reactor, but all I know is if that pump with an electric motor doesn't run when I need it, I'm in a lot of trouble. And I'm working on a new book now on visual thinking, and I've been researching things, and I found out there was a second Fukushima nuclear power plant that was saved, probably by a visual thinker. It was built on a little higher ground. It had some watertight doors, but the plant manager, who'd worked there for years and he knew every nook and cranny in the plant, got his people together, talked them into coming back onto the site, and they basically made giant extension cords from one functioning generator to each one of the reactors. That was some quick thinking, and he saved it. Let's go to the next slide. And then you take something like on my next slide, the Boeing Max accident. And I couldn't believe they did what they did. Engineers tend to use a lot of jargon, like possible impact with terrain. Impact with terrain, that's jargon for crashing. Why don't you just come out and just say it? Well, the mistake they made is they took a sensor, about the size of this Sharpie pen, and it's a thing called an angle of attack sensor. It sticks out from on the front of the plane, right near the cockpit windows, measures air angle, tells you if the plane's stalling. Normally, that just acts as an aid to the pilot. But when they made the Boeing Max, they wanted to make it on the same 737 airframe and put big, huge, fuel-efficient engines that are gigantically wide. And they had to move them further forward so they wouldn't hit the ground, and which made the plane a bit unstable and prone to stalling. So they thought it'd be a really good idea to take this sensor and automatically have it push the nose down if the plane started to stall. Well, they forgot to tell the pilots about this. So the poor pilots were just pulling back on the yoke and pulling back on the yoke, and no, it was hopeless. And I'm going, how could you do this? I mean, as soon as I found out that the angle of attack sensors is fragile and about the same size as this, you trusted a single fragile sensor. Yeah, that's a visual thinking mistake. Now there was a whole bunch of other stuff too. The flight manual, well, then they covered it up in the flight manual. That was not a visual thinking mistake. But initially, I think it was an innocent visual thinking mistake. The next slide shows a big, there's the angle of attack sensor. You can see it's just a little tiny thing there. And you can go to the next slide. This is a state-of-the-art pork processing plant. This was built 4 years ago. And when I looked at this, I was very shocked when I found out that every piece of equipment in there is imported. We don't make it anymore. Now, most of my plant stuff, I've worked in beef, and we have one person that knows how to build a beef plant. He just finished up one. He's going to be building another beef plant because the supply chain problems we've had. Ranchers are getting interested in selling directly to the consumer. But the reason why we don't make this stuff anymore is because we took out skilled trades 25 years ago. So you don't have the kid who did terrible in math inventing this equipment. I call this equipment the clever engineering department. And then I went to a poultry processing plant a year ago. Every piece of equipment came from Holland. Absolutely beautiful. Brought over in 100 shipping containers. So the next slide shows something that I learned in working in construction. I mean, I'm into construction first more than I am into autism. And I found an interesting thing on every single plant I worked on, and this was mostly beef. And I was out on these projects, living in crummy hotels along with the construction guys. And what I've learned is the visual thinkers like me, they'll be the drafting person, lay out the whole plant. They'll also be the person who invents mechanically clever equipment. And then your more mathematical engineers, they do the things we don't understand, like boilers, refrigeration, calculating roof trusses. You got to have all of that stuff. And what's happening is the visual thinkers are retiring and they're not getting replaced. And now the problem we've got construction projects going on right now, the visual thinkers are old like me, and they're trying to supervise jobs by Zoom, walking around with GoPros and stuff like that because they're at risk of getting COVID. No, we have a serious problem here. I went out to the Steve Jobs Theater last year. Beautiful structural glass walls, carbon fiber roof. It came from a company based in Italy. And I stood in the middle of the Steve Jobs Theater and I screamed. I held my hands up like this in their lobby, and the whole roof vibrated. We don't make it anymore. We've got a serious problem here. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, the thing is I'm a bottom-up thinker. We're highly verbal thinkers. tend to be a top-down thinker, very vague thing. We'll talk about inclusion. Yes, I definitely believe in inclusion. But I tend to think about it in a more specific way. Here's a situation that worked beautifully. Here's where we had a problem, and I see it. It's not abstract. Concepts are formed by putting examples I can visualize into categories. Categories are the beginning of concept formation. If you want to teach a child, for example, concepts like up, down, in, and on, you could take a toy airplane and have it land on the table. It could fly under the table, over the table. It could be beside the table. Those are your position words. And how I figured out when I was a child that a dog wasn't a cat by sorting by size. I might have been 5. Then the neighbors got a dachshund, and a dachshund's the same size as a cat. And I can remember sitting on the next door neighbor's lawn, studying this little black dachshund, trying to figure out why she was not a cat. Well, she had the same nose shape. She also barked, and she smelled like a dog. Now, bottom-up thinking is the same way that computers work. That's the thing that's interesting. Artificial intelligence in computers is bottom-up thinking. Like, for example, to train a computer to diagnose melanoma, skin cancer, you show it 2,000 melanomas, and then you show it 2,000 other skin rashes, and it learns to sort. So the way my mind works is the more things I get out and do, then I fill up my database. I've had parents say to me, I've seen my kid blossom when he got a job. We have a tendency to over-shoulder these kids. I'm seeing too many kids that are not learning basic skills like shopping. And one of the things that really helped my mind is all the travel I did and the things I've seen gives me a huge amount of experiences. The next slide just gives you some tips for working with the kids that are different. Do not overload working memory. This is something where you have to do a workaround. That's the engineering term for an accommodation. Now, another area where you have a working memory issue is driving. If I had not learned to drive, there would have been no career in the livestock industry, period. Now, how did I manage to learn to drive? I was very lucky that my aunt's mailbox out on the ranch was on a dirt road 3 miles away, and we had to go there 6 days a week. So I got 36 miles a week of driving in a very safe place. Or you might start in a big open parking lot. And I started, it was a 3 on the tree with a horrible clutch. I started in the middle of the horse pasture. Yes, it did jerk around. But if we had started where it was parked by my aunt's patio, I probably would have gone through the patio gate. So you want to make sure that you do it in a, you start in a totally safe place. Because what you got to do to deal with the working memory issue is get driving into motor memory where you don't have to think about it. And then you carefully start to do traffic. And the big mistake that's made is pushing them into it way too fast. A first job at a Christmas time store, that would be a disaster. A super busy McDonald's takeout window. These are the things you don't put them in. Also, any task that has a number of steps, you need to give them a pilot's checklist. Okay, so if we're going to unjam the copier, you do 1, 2, 3. Don't just yank the paper out. You give them a pilot's checklist, because I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. That's something I just can't remember. The other thing you've got to do is stretch them. Always give them choices. Mother would give me choices. I was afraid to go to my aunt's ranch, and she gave me a choice. You can go for a week and come back. And then it was a trip all the way across the country in a plane. Or you could stay there all summer. Got out there and I loved it. We got to limit the video game playing. Now today, of course, with all the COVID, we're doing a lot of screen time for school. And one of the things that's helped me with COVID is every morning I get up, I take a shower, I get dressed for work. Every morning by 8 o'clock. No slouching around in stuff you sleep in. And I find that I feel a lot better. And provide choices of things. That's the other thing. But just sitting in your room all day isn't one of the choices. And if you've got a kid that's addicted to video games, I have talked to 3 people. One of them was one of the individuals on the autism spectrum. The other 2 are parents. where they started weaning the kid off and they introduced him to car mechanics. And that was very, very successful. You know, you got to wean them off slowly and give them an opportunity to do something else, give them a choice. Well, we're just getting near the end of my formal talk, and then we're going to put the rest of the time into questions. Let's go to my last slide. And we got to start thinking about what's the ultimate goal of education. Where's a student 10 years after graduation from high school? I was working on that DIFAT project. And I was a terrible student in high school because I just wasn't interested. And Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, gave me interesting projects. And then he made studying become a pathway to a goal of becoming a scientist. I think that's really, really super important. We've got to get a student launched out there. I'm seeing a lot of kids, top grades, fall on their face in the job world. And what we need to be doing is teaching work skills early. Kids in the pipeline now, let's do chores. When they're like 10 or 11 years old, they need jobs like walking dogs for the neighbors, putting out the trash cans. Another job I always would recommend, and most of that's closed down right now due to COVID, is church and neighborhood volunteer jobs, where this 11-year-old is doing a task, like maybe setting up the food or something like that for the reception, doing a task for a boss that's not family. Instant illegal, we need to get them real jobs. And I'm seeing some parents that just can't let go. I had one mom of a 16-year-old, really great student, and he had never gone in a store and bought anything. And I suggested that he go in the office supply store and buy printer paper. And mom started crying. She said she couldn't let go. And I said, I want you to really think about this. Printer paper? That's a pretty innocent thing. No, they're not learning this basic stuff, and they've got to learn that. And I'd like to get the transition to work done before they graduate from high school. And I think sometimes people are getting too locked into the autism word. You know, for me, my primary identity is scientist, inventor, problem solver, designer of equipment, research in animal behavior. Autism is an important part of who I am. I would not want to change. I like the logical way I think, but it's secondary to being a scientist. And what I've done is I hope I've made you think, because I've worked with all kinds of people that had undiagnosed autism, dyslexia, ADHD, and you know what? They're retiring and they need to be replaced, because when your electric wires fall down, you're going to need them. We've got infrastructure falling apart. There's a lot of stuff we don't know how to build. It isn't just chicken processing plants either. I think we'll just leave it with that. Thank you. We'll do questions now.
Thank you so much, Temple. Boy, you have us all thinking for sure about so many different things.
Hear you.
Okay, can you hear me
Can't hear
now?
you.
You can't hear me. Okay, let me just double check.
Can't hear you.
There's a little bit of a delay, Temple.
Your sound, nope, can't hear you.
Okay, hold on just a second. Let's see. Can you hear me now?
Hear you.
Okay, let me get some assistance from our...
Temple, can you try turning, can you hear me? Temple?
Can you hear? And
Well, I don't know if you
of
can
us-
still hear me. Unfortunately, the chat function is disabled.
Okay, hold
And
on
can
just
you,
a minute.
Can you enable the chat function? I have no chat function to read the questions.
Okay, hold on just a minute. We're almost there. Can
I
you hear me
hear
now,
you.
Temple?
Can't hear you.
Okay, wait. Just
Well,
a
you
minute.
might have to write the, well, all right.
Hold on.
All right, okay, now I do. Okay,
Okay,
I can hear you
great.
now.
You can hear me now.
Yes, I can.
Terrific, because we have some terrific questions I want to make
All right,
sure
that's good.
that,
Okay.
that we can ask you. Okay, so our first question is coming from one of our listeners today, and she says, "You are my idol. I love listening to you. Will you be traveling when COVID is over, and how has COVID affected you?"
Well, as I said earlier, I've done no traveling since March. Everything's been canceled. They've been postponing a lot of events. Some things are postponed to spring. I think that's going to be canceled. I am at the at-risk category. So I'm probably pretty well grounded until we get a decent vaccine. I've been doing lots of Zoom conferences. And there's some advantages to that. Sometimes more people get to hear a message. There's also disadvantages. One of the things I miss the most is just going over to my office at the university and just mingling with my colleagues. And this is the same problem that people that have an office. Some lady the other day said, I just want my office building back. And so I can mingle with the colleagues. That is one of the biggest problems. And I have people that I meet with, my students, and a few people I have lunch with. I go over to school, occasionally, but that's been the biggest problem.
Mm-hmm. I think isolation has really been difficult for so many people in this time. And as much as we hope to and are enjoying our time with you today, it is different than if we were with you in our ballroom. So we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. The next question is coming from one of our participants, and it says, if you were the Secretary of Education, what changes would you make to the education day, the curriculum, and the calendar?
Well, the first thing I would do is put a lot of hands-on things back in the schools. All the things that are impossible to do well online. And we need these things. It started, art for little kids. Now art, you actually could do some art classes online, woodworking, sewing, making things. And I have a book, and a lot of these projects you can do at home. It's called Calling All Minds. It's my children's project book. And it has projects ranging from the paper snowflake that I just showed you. And I was horrified to find out that about 20 to 30% of kids in Colorado, when I did a book signing for that book 2 years ago, had never made a paper airplane. They're totally removed from doing anything practical. And I think that's a problem. And we need all the different kinds of minds. And there's a kind of engineering, I call it the clever engineering, where we're losing it. And I'm very concerned about that. And I'm talking about high-end skilled trades. I'm not talking about floor tiles and roofing. That's not high-end skilled trades. I'm talking about welders that can read drawings and just build and just make things. That's one of the things I would do. And one of the reasons why Germany and Holland, high-wage countries, are sending this equipment over here is because they've kept the skilled trades. It's very expensive to import equipment in 100 shipping containers from Holland to make one poultry processing plant.
Mm-hmm. Well, we hope that, people are listening and they'll be able to advocate for, increasing those opportunities for students in the schools, in the communities where they live. I'm not sure, Temple, if you were on this morning, but we do have people from 39 different states, some from Canada, Mexico, and Argentina listening today.
Well, great. See, this is the good side of the of the Zoom, is that normally if I was in your ballroom, you wouldn't have people from Argentina and Mexico.
We certainly wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The next question. If a student with autism is being bullied in the classroom, what do you think is the best way for the teacher to handle this?
Well, the way my teacher handled it, this is my third grade teacher. She used what I then found out is called peer-mediated intervention. And I just wrote about that a couple of years ago in a paper. I wrote how a teenager with autism learn how to work, how horses help the teenager with autism learn how to work and have friends. First of all, the only places where I had friends was where there was a shared interest. We got to work on these kids that are different, shared interest friendships. And for me, it was horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Now, when I was a little kid in elementary school, Mrs. Deach explained that I had a disability that was not visible. And that's called peer-mediated intervention. High school was just horrible. But I did have a few refuges away from bullying, and it was where the shared interests were. Well, again, a lot of the things they've taken out of some of the schools are the things that where I would have had friends.
Yeah. Shared interests. I think that's really important for parents and all the educators that are online to hear about today. Another question comes from one of our vocational rehabilitation counseling participants today. She says, as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, I work with both adults and high school students with autism. What would your advice on helping them with employment exploration and employment hiring in general. They say thank you for your time and wisdom, and they can't wait to read your books.
Okay, well, thank you very much. One of the things I see mistakes being made is oftentimes there's no differentiation made between bagging groceries as a training job to learn work skills. For maybe someone like me or somebody might go into computer programming just to learn some work skills when they're, 17, 16 years old, and where it is an appropriate career. Maybe for someone with Down syndrome, it would be an appropriate career. They're not making that differentiation between, where a lower level job or a higher level job. One of the things I'm going to look at is different kinds of minds. The object visualizers, skilled trades. Maybe some of them need to go right straight into an apprenticeship program or a 2-year community college program for something like electrical line worker. That's a 2-year program. A wind power repairman. These are all, building wind power. That's a boom or a bust, just like oil is. Oil is a boom or a bust. Pipeline welder, no, that's a boom or a bust. And all you know how to do is beautiful certified welds on pipeline. You don't know how to do anything else. No, the kind of welder that's going to never go away is the guy where you can give him a little drawing. I know a guy's got a little bitty shop. I was just there. And some guy from the oil field came in and had a little drawing for some big electrical boxes, and he just made them. You see, that's going to never go away.
Right. So we want to look for long-term opportunities.
Well, and that skilled trades for the visual thinkers, and then you got your mathematical minds. Some of those need to be doing programming. I mean, I've seen situations where you might have a 13-year-old kid, brilliant in math, both parents are programmers, and they didn't think to teach their kid programming. And they said, thank you for such a good idea. They've gotten so much into the medical model. And one of them was probably a bit on the spectrum themselves, didn't think to teach their kid programming. I mean, one advantage you have of computer jobs is parents can actually teach their kid to do it. There's no health and safety issues the way there would be with skilled trades. I can't have 10-year-olds on a construction site. Absolutely not. But I can have 10-year-olds doing programming and all kinds of math stuff.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from a slightly different perspective, but one that I know you'll appreciate being a university professor. This comes from one of our participants, Natalie, who is a disability supports professional in a university. So she says, pertaining to supporting young folks with ASD beginning their college careers, what are the most important things for a disability support professional to keep in mind besides basic accommodations?
Well, the first thing is when that person gets in trouble in a class, they need to do something about it. When I failed my first math quiz, I got tutoring. I didn't wait until I had totally trashed the class. They've got to learn to ask for help. I cannot emphasize that enough. I was somebody that needed some extra time on tests. The other thing I'm seeing is I've seen situations where they almost over-accommodated. Well, you have to have accommodations. One thing you cannot do, we got that small processor, you got that Intel 286. That's got a chip like that big in it. Looks like a tarantula. And you can't load that little tiny processor. Long strings of verbal information. Well, and if they can't take notes fast enough, they're going to need to record the class. That's something they may need to do. Then they can stop it and do the notes later. You can't shove them into a job that's a ton of multitasking. Super crazy takeout window, Christmas rush at a store. I'm thinking of specific examples that absolutely won't work. The wrapping station at our Barnes & Noble. No. The rest of the year at Barnes & Noble, that's our bookstore. Yes. Rest of the year at Barnes & Noble will be perfect job. The Christmas wrapping station at that same store would be a chaos mess. Now you see, as I see it, and I've been there, I see it. There's nothing's abstract about it. I'm also thinking there's specific examples. Our office supply store would be really, really good. And I know a boy that's a young man who's working in office supply store and doing extremely well there.
Terrific. I think that all makes great sense. And when we are thinking about our college students, one of the things that they've had to adapt to, and actually, frankly, all students from pre-K on up, is this virtual learning. And one of our participants is saying that she has big issues focusing. Do you have any suggestions on how to help people focus better?
I can tell you what you need to do. You got to flip the classroom. And I've learned that from my own experiences with doing online learning. I did one disastrous live lecture. It was horrid. And so what I do is I pre-record the lectures, I put them up online, and they have to watch them. And then the class period is we discuss the material in the lecture, much more interactive. Or let's say I've got some other kind of big class. I might just put some PowerPoint decks up there that are that each slide will stand alone, and they'll be responsible for them. And they could just look at the PowerPoint deck and skip some of the lecture, because I think we got to get the engaged Zoom conference talking back and forth. And I just read a brand new survey in Business Week magazine about a week ago, where Masters of Business students definitely preferred the flipped classroom. The other thing is a good online class. I spend more time on that. I got to get on the discussion board and answer every student's post. I'm getting better at the kind of questions. I ask them more open-ended questions. I had a talk on animal welfare. What was the most important things you learned in the lecture? And they're going to be on those slides are going to be on the test. And then you have the book. But another student I know, she's taking an online class. It's horrible. There's absolutely no interaction. We've got to get some live interaction. And
so
then
from the student perspective, what do you recommend that they can do on their end if the classroom isn't flipped, or even if it is flipped? Is there anything for the individual or the student perspective?
I'll tell you what you do. You get up in the morning, you shower, you dress for school. And if the classes are asynchronous, in other words, you watch that, you do it when you're fresh. Now, what we do with my flipped classroom is the classroom section is recorded, so somebody can watch that later on, because we have some students with no internet access, and we have some that have to just be on the phone because of bad internet access on ranches. But I would recommend get up, treat it like school. One of the problems I've seen, I've been on a ton of Zoom conferences, people in their underwear, people laying on their bed, the laptops obviously on top of them. No. I think one of the things that's going to help you is I try to get my work where I have to really think done in the morning. So so my recorded lectures, I would watch them in the morning, and I'd take notes when I'm fresh, and I would do the hardest stuff when I'm fresh. But if I didn't get up and dress for work in the morning, I don't know, I just wouldn't have any motivation.
So set up your workspace.
I've got the same shirt on that I would have on if I came and visited. Yes, I am in my kitchen, but I cleaned the junk off the counters. and this computer is all hardwired in, and I can't move it. And I wouldn't dare move it, so I'd be afraid I'd break it.
So set up your station and treat it like you were going to school.
Yes, and dress. I had to get after one person about wearing an undershirt. No. Let's. And I find it helps my attitude. Like even when I get out of the shower and I'm drying myself off, I'm feeling better, because it kind of wakes me up. And
it helps you get into the mode of learning. Our next question, Temple, goes in. We're going to take a slightly different turn here. It says, Temple, you mentioned different modal categories that autistic students fit into: verbal, visual, etc. Is there an early assessment that can be given to autistic students which would render these results?
No, there isn't.
That might guide educators?
No, there isn't. Let me tell you why there isn't. If you look at the research on the object visualizer, that's me, thinks in photographic images, and the visual spatial, which is the more mathematical pattern thinker. One of the things it's done in over half of all the research, and I have just been finished reviewing all that research, the object visualizers are merged in with the visual spatial, so it's useless. But the best way to assess it is to, first of all, when they hit algebra, it's going to be impossible. When they get around 7 years old, the second grade, third grade, the visual people like me, if there's an art class, they're going to shine in art class. Little mathematicians are going to shine in math. But I've looked at some of this Common Core math, I went actually just about a month ago. I went and I did the first grade, second grade, third grade Common Core math. And I'm going, I am lost. And it seems to me, when I look at this stuff, a lot of this stuff is, it's very highly verbal. And a lot of people in education are verbal. And the first step, you got to understand there are different ways that we think. Like right now, I'm working on a project with Betsy, my wonderful co-author. She's totally verbal. I'm totally visual. We make a great team. And we're learning how to understand, oh, she can take my stuff and rearrange it in ways that's just beautiful. But I have stuff that she wouldn't make the material originally, but she knows how to rearrange it and then add other things to it. You see, the skills complement each other. Mm-hmm. But the first step is realizing that, that people are different.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that wonderful when we can find someone who connects in with us and brings their different skills and abilities, so
and
that
the verbal thinkers are really good on, the writing and stuff.
Yeah.
And now with me, with reading, at third grade, I did not read. And they were using the Dick and Jane books, sight words didn't work for me. Mm-hmm. So some kids are sight words. Mother taught me with phonics. But you take another kid who's sight words and you ram phonics down his throat, you're going to mess them up. You want to use the method that works. But by the time I was in third grade, my art ability was obvious.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like one of your messages is to try lots of different alternate methods.
That's right.
At the young age.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because if mother hadn't homeschooled me with phonics, my teacher was getting really concerned about it. And I very quickly, in one semester, she spent about an hour, 4 days a week. I went from first grade level of reading up to sixth grade level of reading. The other thing we did is we read books worth reading, like The Wizard of Oz. Dick and Jane are not books worth reading.
All right, Temple, we have time for a couple more questions.
Okay, great.
This comes from another one of our participants. What are your thoughts on being called autistic? I've seen some people don't prefer to be called this because autism doesn't define them, but others do want to be called autistic. And also, what are your thoughts on the puzzle piece as a symbol for the autism community?
Well, on the thing about person with autism, that's person first, or autistic is identity first. I mean, there's a lot of mixed stuff on that. Some people prefer either one. So in my writing, I try to use some of both. You see, this is something that's highly verbal too, that I'm not sure what I should be using. Mm-hmm. What I get concerned about is I notice that people in Silicon Valley avoid the label. Okay, now I looked up the mathematician that was featured on 60 Minutes. I looked his profile up. He had a little thing on there and working on autism employment, but he was telling all about what he did with the Space Telescope data analysis. So it was very clear that was coming first, even though he's now been on 60 Minutes where he definitely, disclosed. See, this gets into a real tricky thing because for me, the scientist comes first. And I'm seeing too many little kids, like 8-year-olds. They come up to me and all they want to do is tell me about their autism. I'd rather them tell me about their telescope they built or anything, or they like trains, or they like to read books, just anything. It's the other thing you got to do is you have to stretch these kids. You don't chuck them in the deep end of the pool like that crazy Christmas wrapping station. That's the last place I'm going to put them. But on the other hand, if you don't stretch them just outside the comfort zone, they don't develop. And you give choices.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Temple, I think that's so poignant what you're talking about with regard to identity. It's so important for us to empower young people, but at the same time, we also want to empower them to flush out all of their interests and identity markers that they have so that they can find communities where they share interests.
Well, that's right.
We were talking about before.
Well, and the thing is that if you don't expose them to a lot of different stuff, I'm an Easterner. I'm a non-ag background. And what I have done is improved a lot of things in the cattle industry. And I got exposed to cattle as a teenager. You see, that's a perfect example. Or if I hadn't been exposed to them, I wouldn't be in that industry. Okay, and there's not enough chance to actually, try different stuff on to find out what you might like. And that's another reason for doing lots of hands-on things. And there's a tendency to, stick the nose up at the high-end skilled trades, but you want to get the jobs that are more flexible and jobs that involve repair, because those jobs will not have the boom or bust cycles.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're certainly seeing that in this current pandemic. I wanted to go back for a few minutes to talk a little bit about what you were just mentioning with regard to getting young people out of their comfort zone. So how can we help parents believe in their children's future and not necessarily be afraid to dream or be holding them back because we're concerned about the risks that might unfold?
Well, you're talking about trivial risks. Buying printer paper at the local office supply store. That was about 3 years ago. I'm not talking about stuff that's 20 years ago. I mean, I was shopping from a very young age. I mean, or you stop at a gas station to get gas. I see it. Okay, I'm now seeing the different gas stations around town. I'll pick the one where when I'm pumping the gas, I can kind of keep an eye on the store. Send the kid in there to get a jug of milk. Mm. I'm talking about stuff that simple that they're not doing.
Small everyday tasks.
Small everyday things.
Sense of confidence.
They are not doing it. The other day, I had a guy call me. He was working with a girl that works with the dolphin that lost its tail. I'm not very good at remembering names because I don't see a picture, but there's that famous dolphin that lost its tail, and he's on display now to inspire people. And there was a lady that was, on the autism spectrum that was working there as a volunteer with that dolphin. Really loved that job. And now, of course, COVID's messed everything all up. And she wanted to contact me. And I talked to her boss and I said, she needs to call me. She was afraid to call me. She needs to just call me. I had a boss that made me do some cold calls for a feedlot construction business. I was scared to do them. I did them. I was very successful. You know what? She called me. Then after she called me successfully, she was really happy about it. That's stretching. That's an example in the last 2 days where she was stretched just slightly outside comfort zone to call me. That's not, you don't chuck them in the deep end of the pool. Boy, driving, we have to take it slow, but we're going to take it slow and we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting as I'm listening to you, I think that also builds the confidence for the parents and the caregivers. So the more that they start to see that people are having successes on these small levels, it builds up the confidence on both sides so that there's more comfort for those next steps of risk taking that need to happen.
Well, the other thing is I come out of the construction industry, so I like to just tell it like it is. There's a scene in the movie when my boss slammed down the deodorant and said, "You stink, use it." That scene happened. And at the time, I was really offended and upset. I had to not be a filthy, dirty slob. It's okay to be eccentric, but he made it very clear that being a filthy, dirty slob wasn't okay. And no, that one's non-negotiable. Now, in the 70s, they had these gunky, horrible roll-on deodorants that I just hated. Well, now you've got ones you can't even feel them when you put them on. So, there's some things we're going to have to do, and you can't just call your colleagues stupid. You can't say that welding looked like pigeon doo-doo. I got corrected on that in my first job, and my boss made me apologize to the welding guy. And what he did is he took me into his office, and he quietly explained what I should do. He didn't do it in front of anybody else. In private, explained what I should do. Let's say I was working in a store and I'm standing too close to customers. Okay, let's say pre-COVID. Well, then he explains to me what I should do, not to follow him around the store. Explained to me exactly what I should do. It's the same thing when I was a little kid. Let's say got a drink in here and I mix it with my finger. Mother didn't scream no. She said, use the spoon. You give the instruction in private. Harley, my boss, he did exactly the right thing. He was a great job coach. Harley, an old engineer.
Well, I think that's a wonderful message that you just delivered to all job coaches and employers and teachers and all the support professionals and family members that are listening today. Is those deal breakers are okay, but with some dignity in the delivery. Yes, well, do you have one more tip? And then we're going to have to wrap up for today.
You can't be vague. You can't just say you're too aggressive with customers. You have to explain to them very directly and quietly what they should do. You might say, now watch Jim, how he interacts with the customer. It cannot be vague. Vagueness does not work. It
So
needs to be very
concrete and
clear,
examples.
very, very clear, what's right and wrong. I'm really sorry about interrupting. Now this has gotten worse with Zoom, but this is part of my little processor problem.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Temple. I just want to stand up and give you a standing ovation. I hope that you're
thank you
feeling the
very,
love
very much.
from all of our participants. For everyone listening today, I do want to let you know that as part of your registration, this session has been recorded and it will go up on our virtual attendee hub later this afternoon and evening. And so you'll be able to access it for future viewing for up to 90 days, along with all of the other presentations. For those of you watching live, we're going to move into another hour break session. I hope you will join us in our virtual Zoom rooms. There's one in the break session that's sort of a general networking opportunity. If you're interested in some of the Pennsylvania ACE Collaborative hubs and signature projects, you could join that group in the virtual attendee hub that's under the ACE hubs and signature projects tab at the top of your virtual attendee hub. Temple, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today. We are so grateful.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time talking to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care and stay safe.
Okay, I'm going to leave the meeting.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right, goodbye.